Our last item on the agenda is item 12. Dr. Collins, and I see Dr. Lund, another member of the Delta Independent Science Board, coming forward. Members, as you probably know, Dr. Collins has been now officially anointed as the chair of the Delta Independent Science Board, effective, I think, June 1?
Yeah, but you just told me that I am not coming before you as a sovereign. So I'm not sure. If I'm not a sovereign,
you
I'm
are
not sure
certainly
this is
the Delta Independent Science Board, but under any meaning of the word sovereign that I understand, it's hard to argue that any of us are sovereign.
I think you're right.
Okay. But, Dr. Collins, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for accepting the onerous duty of chairing the Delta Independent Science Board, and you will probably get called to testify at legislative hearings and so on, since many are being scheduled for the interim activity around water and ecosystem issues.
But I am allowed to delegate, right? So I can delegate to Jay for some.
You can wrestle with Dr. Lund however you like on dividing responsibility.
Right. So I'm going to go through. We've actually have quite a bit to go over today. We've actually been, from my perspective, nicely productive recently. I will say, though, that to the comment that was made about the Delta Science Plan looking like the drafts 1 and 2 of the Delta Plan, the Science Board did not have that same reaction. So we found this to be much
better than
much
our
better
earlier
than drafts 1 and 2 of the Delta
Frank,
Plan.
you were not here. They blasted us on the first couple of drafts of the Delta Plan, which improved our work substantially.
And we last week we did receive the draft of the Delta Science Plan from Peter and staff. Many positive comments from the members of the board. There are a lot of suggestions that we are already gathering. Jay, myself, and John Weens are the subcommittee appointed to gather the comments from the Science Board and then provide comments to you by your deadlines for the next draft. So, but basically we felt, as Val Connor said, definitely a big step in the right direction. Some really needed thought and thought given to structure in the region. How those pieces are actually going to work, the devil's always in the details. But it was, from I think everyone's perspective, refreshing to see that level of thought and effort that got into it. So, with that preamble, so there's several attachments. The first thing we have is that we finalized our comment letter.
That's a May 20th letter?
Yeah. Yes. It was finalized on what doesn't say here on this, but it's attachment 1. It's our comments on the BDCP Chapter 7 and Section 6 of Chapter 3.
Can I ask you one question? I noted on the staff summary on this agenda item, they summarized the documents, and they said your first recommendation was to integrate BDCP's science and monitoring into the Delta Science Plan. But I read your letter and it said exactly the reverse, as best I understood it. Opening sentence says, Science Board recommends the Bay Delta Conservation Plan employ the nascent Delta Science Plan as the platform for science, monitoring, and adaptive management. Now, I just looked at those, and
I think the intent of what we're saying, and you chime in, Jay, is that there should not be separate science initiatives and science structures. They should be combined in some way.
No, I thought your letter was pretty clear, but the summary seemed to say the opposite. So.
Well, it says here that we will present the contents in more detail, so that's the more detail you just got. So. Do you want to say anything on that? Or?
No, my recollection is of the letter is that our intention was that the BDCP science program should fit within an overall one science, one Delta kind of a plan, not the reverse.
Right. And that I think that now that there is this structure and a draft of the Delta Science Plan, discussions have already begun. As Val said, discussions occurred prior to this draft. Since the draft is out, there are now more discussions with BDCP, with the Science Board, with the science program, to figure out what it means to put these pieces together. So from my perspective, my personal experience in the last week since this came out, things are definitely going in the right direction, but there will be some devil in some details.
Your letter expressed concern about, as you say, mere coordination.
Yes.
As insufficient by itself to reach the desired outcome.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the rethinking the rules for the adaptive management team. Again, I think this collaborative adaptive management team that's been set up under the remand is, as Val said, again, that's great that she preceded us, a good pilot for what do we mean by how is this going to work. And
When you say this is the BIOPS?
The BIOP, yes.
You guys are not part of that, right?
No, but
Okay.
Delta Science Program
Right.
people are on that. And I think that this will be a good test of this ability to what do you do when you don't get consensus. And again, we expressed some concerns about the issue. It's in another memo yet, that if the adaptive management team under the EIR structure is not set up so that it does not reach consensus, it then goes up to the authorizing entities group and then the permit oversight group. Right?
But that's the BDCP structure.
Right.
And until quite recently, everybody argued the BIOPS case was not BDCP. Now, I understand there's an overlap. I never was really sold on the argument since it's all involving fish and delta and water and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it will be, I expect that it's likely to be our inclination that all of this needs to come together, that you can't have these separate science plans. You certainly can't have effective adaptive management plans that are all over the place with everybody having their own. That just seems like it's not going to work in terms of what we want out of the Delta. And it's more likely to cause more controversy than light.
Resolve it.
And so I'm kind of excited and worried at the same time about the BIOPS process and the BDCP process and the Delta Plan process. They're all separate. They need to come together at some point. We have to sort of get some of the entropy out of the system. But some of the conversations that are going on within and between those groups are really pretty promising at this time.
Isn't one of the key differences that the litigants to the party that objected to the delay are involved in the development of the process here, non-governmental organizations, environmental groups, but there's no indication yet that actual BDCP comparable work will involve that pattern. Not to my knowledge, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know yet.
Okay.
We sent out a short memo to Jerry Merrill asking that when they do the, when we look at the administrative draft of the BDCP EIR, which we have now, versus the public draft that will be released later, that there's some red line version, something so that we can look for changes. Because
so you don't have to read it all over again from scratch.
Yes.
Yes.
And because we have provided comments on the administrative draft, we'd like to know how those comments were responded to, if they were, when we look at the public draft. That was pretty straightforward. We have completed the first of our large science program reviews, habitat restoration in the Delta and Sassoon Marsh. This is provided. It's here for you now. We presented this at the science conference. It's intent to present this to the council at a time when you have enough time to listen to it. We'd really value your feedback on the utility of the conclusions, the structure of the review. It would be good feedback for us to get how useful you find that. But it would take some time to go through that in detail.
Well, let's do this. I had read this when it came out in April, and I think Randy had read it too. And I thought it was a very useful conceptual way to address what we're always asking for: what in the hell's going on, what's happened, what's likely to happen. And Mr. Knopp, if you and Dr. Collin could work together on scheduling a time so this could be presented, about an hour, do you think?
Yeah, I would say probably I would say it'd be 40 minutes for presentation. John
and then
Weems.
Questions.
Yeah, and then 20 minutes for a good viable discussion.
If you two would work on the schedule, and we'll schedule that at mutual convenience.
And I don't think in the interest of time, I won't go over the recommendations from the report. As you say, you've got them all.
Right.
We also have started our discussion of our next review of science programs in the Delta, fish and flows. This is our shorthand term for referring to fish and flows because of the concern about flows and what it does to a number of the endangered species in the Delta. We realize we'll be looking at this in conjunction with many other factors that affect fish populations. But again, fish and flows is the shorthand term that we're using, just so you know. So again, we've appointed a small group, Judy Meyer, Jay Lund, and Joe Fernando, and they are, in contrast to our previous review of habitat restoration science, where we sent out large surveys, got a lot of information back. We're trying a slightly different approach in that there is already a lot of existing information and recent reports. So we are doing a more informal survey of people involved in the subject, looking at the existing reports, and then this small group will come back to the full board with a proposal for how we conduct the in-depth review we need to come up with our conclusion to get that done. So hopefully it's not going to take as long. Jay, do you want to comment on that?
Well, we hope it doesn't take as long.
Yeah. Yes,
I think that's the main thing, because we have quite a lot of other topics to get to. This particular issue of fish and flows being as non-contentious as it is,
Yes.
we're probably going to have most of our focus on how well is our sort of scientific community in this region organized to address those issues in ways that are useful. That, I think, is our first concern in this review, rather than trying to answer that hollowed question, how much water do fish need?
We're taking baby steps and over.
Walk first.
Yes, walk first. So we did discuss our review assignments for the BDCP, EIR, EIS, and that attachment is given. You'll note farther down that Dr. Ed Hood from the University of Maryland has had to leave the ISB for, he's just got a huge, overwhelming workload with some new positions he's taken at his institution. So we need more fisheries biology expertise. We have to reassign some of the duties in looking at the BDCP EIR, but we will probably we're having discussions, or the Delta Science Program is having discussions with Mike Healy to see if he can assist us as a former ISB member. Can he assist in some of this review process?
I just want to say, you're going to come in with your recommendations. Dr. Goodwin will hopefully concur with those recommendations, correct. And to the extent we can be expeditious in reviewing the process and all of that stuff, we understand you need the full range of talent to do your job.
Yeah. And we have already put out the announcement for a replacement ISB member, looking for somebody that specializes in fish ecology.
When's the deadline close for that?
August 14th, something like that? August 5th? Okay. August 5th it closes.
Okay. Great.
So at your September meeting, maybe we can get a decision on that board member? Is that what we're thinking? Or would it take longer?
Actually, a lot depends. What took time last time we went through is just taking references and going through the process. So August is the big vacation season, so I think it's going to be very driven by how quickly we can get to references. But that was really the thought of, if Dr. Healy, who's former lead scientist, member of ISB, would be available, we don't need to rush, because there's a very good chance that when you go for these high-level people, that they're not just going to be able to drop stuff with the type of time commitment that we need on the ISB.
Yeah. So that took us up to the May 17th teleconference, and then you have a little paragraph. Last week we had a meeting on the 19th and 20th.
That was the telephone conference meeting?
Yeah, the teleconference in May, but then we had an in-person meeting last week on the 19th and 20th. And that was actually a really good meeting from I think a lot of our perspective. Again, a big part of it was talking about the Delta Science Plan, a lot of really good discussion about that. We finalized a memo to you and others about the BDCP EIR administrative draft and some of the concerns that we have about that draft, and that we would hope to see addressed in the public draft coming out. And that got finalized and was posted on June 24th last week. And that's available online at this point. It doesn't differ markedly from the draft that you have as one of the attachments here. We tried to be a little more clear in our language. I know you appreciate that, so we did our best. And I think that we kept it as straightforward as we could about the issues that we see with the administrative draft that we'd like to see addressed in the next draft.
Okay.
And then we had it was very much appreciated. We had Shannon Little from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then Brian Gray from UC Hastings came and gave us discussions, presentations, and answered every question we could think of about our responsibilities under CEQA and NEPA. How are those different? Under the NCCP, what are we doing? What are our responsibilities? What is the process? We probably spent a total of 3 hours on those discussions, I would say. And I think everybody found that to be very useful as we are plunging down this slope into the...
Congratulations on having that discussion early. Typically, people get to it at the last, already having decided.
Fine.
They say, well, here's what we've decided. Does it meet the law? Yeah. Better this way. Better this way.
If we're not sovereign, we better meet the law. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
And then we talked more about the Fish and Flows program. Jay just gave you an update on that. So there's several attachments. If you guys have looked through those and you have questions about them, this would be a good time to ask. But
Okay, let's take a look. Judge, you got a question? Question? Nope. Okay. Everyone's happy.
Good.
Or exhausted, one of the two. Probably both. Probably both.
Science likes to make people happy. That's good.
yeah, that's right. That's what
Right.
Trying to make people
we're here to make
Right.
people happy.
How do you suppress Dr. Lund's characteristic habit of having funny titles for papers and projects and things like that?
We encourage it, actually.
Mr. Zlotnick, you wanted to talk on this issue.
Just briefly, not everyone's happy. No, just no. It was a very good meeting, and participated and thought it went well. And I've mentioned this to Dr. Collier, and I hope you might share some concern. Although I think they understand that there's a lot more to the issue than fish and flow, and it's not that flow is not part of the equation, but when you have a document or a process that's all it says, it tends to perpetuate the idea that that's the only issue out there. And so we would hope that whatever comes out will have a different title than just fish and flow. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we'll turn that over to Jay to come up with a really good title. And then my job will be to make up the acronym
Fish,
for it.
flow, and frivolity,
Yes, or something.
something like that. Okay.
We could call it myths of fish and flows.
I got
That
it.
will
Okay.
attract all sides.
Contain your enthusiasm there. Okay, members, any other questions to the Independent Science Board? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you to the members for spending the time and still tolerating the fact you have to go through 27,000 plus pages to do your statutory duty. Okay.
No problem.
Now,